What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Walkout Podcast.
where we cover fights, news, and more. So today we're going to be covering a topic that has been in minds of most UFC fans since about a year back. We're going to be covering a potential super fight between Islam and Ilia Topuria. And we're going to be starting by talking about if this fight will even happen. So, what do you think? Do you think that this fight will happen soon or maybe in the future or even at all?
I mean, as a UFC fan, we have to hope that it happens somewhere down the line. And as you said, there really is a super fight, probably the biggest one you can make at the moment in the UFC. And I would assume all UFC fans would want to see this one. Um, the real question, in my opinion at least, is this fight that the UFC will want to make? I've seen some people mention that it's would be for their benefit to postpone it a bit, not to make it in the nearest future, just to have two dominant champions. I mean, Ilya, obviously in the lightweight division and as a lightweight champ, um, and potentially have Islam Makhachev as the welterweight champion and let them have a few title defenses, just to have two really dominant and skillful champions who are also big names, right? That draw a lot of eyes when they fight. And as a fan, I would want to see this fight. I would have to say quite soon, because I know that often when we plan these fights a long time ahead, and just say stuff like, "Oh, they just need to have a couple of title defenses each," and then someone loses, and the other guy maybe loses or is inactive, and all of a sudden the fight isn't as interesting. So I think that this one is definitely a fight that the UFC need to make, that everyone want to see. Um, the real question, in my opinion, is what weight should it be on this fight? Do you think it should be in the lightweight or in the welterweight division? This one.
Yeah, I think that it depends. You talked a little bit about there about, let's say, if someone loses or not, and if they still are the champion. I think that if we're
Yeah,
going from the perspective of maybe what the UFC thinks, the UFC, I think Dana White, he thinks that Ilya isn't going to lose in the lightweight division like most of us, and he also probably thinks that Islam won't lose in the welterweight division. So if we're going from that perspective, I think that it's pretty unlikely that it happens at 155 pounds, simply because Ilya himself um, has expressed interest in moving up to welterweight, specifically to face Islam, while Islam himself hasn't really talked that much about moving down again, because he's just moving up now. And also, if one of them loses, the only real option I see for about happening at 155 pounds is either if Islam loses against the ADM and decides to go back down, which I think it can happen, but it's not that likely, but it can happen. Or
yeah,
let's say in 2 years or something, when both of them has defended, I don't know, 4 times or something, and let's say that Ilya he just doesn't decide to move up. Maybe Islam is the one who decides to move down, but I still see it as pretty unlikely. I think that most likely the only way to get it at 155 pounds is if Islam loses against EDM and goes back down to 155. Otherwise, I think it will happen at 170 pounds, most likely. And if so,
yeah,
maybe in about a year's time, next International Fight Week, or the one next after that, maybe. I think, you talked a little bit about maybe if the UFC, they told Ilya that he wanted to move up directly, but they told him that you need to stay in lightweight for at least maybe a year, two defenses, something like that. So I think that it depends sort of what the UFC wants Ilia Topuria to do more than what they say to Islam, because I don't think that Islam is moving down if he wins the belt. Do you agree with that?
no, that's true. Yeah, I totally do. And as you said with Ilya, I don't think that UFC will want him to move up directly to welterweight because that puts a bit of a shadow on the new lightweight champion. I mean, say that they moved up directly now to welterweight, Ilia, and someone like a Arman or someone gets the belt. It's like, oh, but the real champion is at welterweight now. So that diminishes the whole respect of the title, basically. So I totally agree with you that I think the UFC will want them to have each probably a defense. Ilia somewhere, maybe in the end of 2025 or in the start of 2026, possibly against, like we mentioned earlier, Arman or Paddy Pimblett or something like that.
Yeah, someone like
Islam,
that.
first of all, will need to win the belt. Yeah, and if he does win the 170 belt, Islam, I think surely
He
they will
also
want
defends.
him to.
He also defends one more time at least, I think.
Yeah,
Right.
because in the welterweight division there's so many good contenders, so it's not like they're running out of options there, and they have to give a welterweight that shot surely, because in the time that this happens, a rightful contender will have risen to the top, since they all have to fight each other basically, and there are so many good contenders there. So to give Ilia the shot immediately before he even has a welterweight fight, I don't think that makes sense even as a fan, and it definitely doesn't for the UFC, in my opinion.
No, yeah, and also like we have to cover the aspect of pay-per-views, and that the UFC is a company that's about making money, and for the UFC, every pay-per-view they can have with a top star or top fighter like Islam and Ilya is another opportunity to sell more pay-per-views, because I'm going to guess that both of them are probably in the top 5 most pay-per-view selling fighters, simply because they are the best. So for the UFC, it doesn't
Yeah.
really make sense to rush the fight between them, because both from like a hype standpoint, but also from marketability and stuff like that. So let's say that they rush the fight, and let's say that Islam loses at 170 or wherever it is at 155, then he probably loses most of his marketability. And I think it's the same thing about Ilia Topuria. I think if Ilia Topuria moves up and he loses, I think that the UFC, I mean, a lot of UFC fans are like bandwagon fans. They join into maybe a fighter that's on a big win streak, and as soon as that guy loses, it's not really the biggest the most marketable fighter anymore. You just look at Alex Pereira and what's happened to him after the Ankalaev fight and him losing his belt. We haven't really heard that much about him since then.
Yeah.
When his fans used to be all over the place back then. So I think that the UFC definitely, yeah. Do you agree with that? That the UFC probably has that in their mind as well. They want to squeeze some pay-per-views out of these guys before they get the big fight.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point by you there, because, like you said, they are two of the biggest names, and we know how the best part of the fan base, the UFC fan base that is, acts when a guy that has this, we have to call it aura, right? That both Islam with his Dagestani privilege, being trained by Khabib, and being such a good fighter, and the best lightweight fighter on record ever, right? And Ilia Topuria is unbeaten, two-weight champ, has knocked out Volkanovski, Holloway, and Oliveira back to back.
Yeah.
So they both have this insane aura at the moment, and however that fight goes, someone will, if it's not like a boring draw or something like that, and even then, right, one guy will lose a bit of that aura and a bit of those potential future pay-per-views, as you rightfully said earlier. So, as you mentioned, I think that the UFC will want to postpone this a bit just to get a few good pay-per-views while this, and also if they piece this fight, like you mentioned, maybe next year or even in 2 years, the next fights that these guys have in their own weight divisions will be extra big because of that. So I think that's probably the best standpoint and strategy for the UFC to have, if you think marketing wise, and that's probably why they are going to do that, because their biggest interest is to sell pay-per-views at this point.
Their biggest interest is to make money. I mean, it's a company, right? It's not really, it's not a sporting league. It's a company. That's the thing. It's not the US. It's not the Olympics, basically.
No, definitely that.
So yeah, we both agree that the fight would probably, unless, let's say, like we talked about, unless Islam maybe loses against JDM and is forced to move back down, and then he will eventually have to face, the lightweight title holder, which probably is Ilia still then, unless he loses to Paddy.
Yeah.
But most probably, if that happens, then they will have to face each other. But unless that happens, and I don't think that it's super likely, it's probably quite unlikely. I'm gonna guess the betting odds for the Islam versus JDM fight will be pretty much in favor to Islam by a lot. I do think that there's a lot more to that fight, maybe that than what might be seen initially. I think that there's actually a way for EDM to win that fight, but that's another topic. So until then, we have to go from the viewpoint that basically both of these guys will keep winning, and then the UFC will have to be the ones who match make this fight. And if they have the deciding, voice in this fight, when it will happen, then most probably, do you agree with that? Maybe it happens in 2 years, a year to 2 years, probably, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think they will want to make this one, and the time frame, it depends a bit on the contenders and who they want. And also, another thing quickly that we can add is that if Islam Makhachev wins the belt, there are so many really, really good contenders in the welterweight division that there is a bit of a big risk that he loses it if he has to defend it against a really good contender. And I'm not saying Islam Makhachev will lose to someone like Sean Brady or Ian Gary or Shavkat Rakhmonov or someone like that, but it is a huge risk. So maybe if he wins the
Oh my
belt, the
God.
UFC will want to make it sooner rather than later, just so that both guys have that pay-per-view draw. But as you said, I think at the earliest in a year, maybe next International Fight Week, and at the latest in 2 years.
Yeah, you're completely right about that. I think maybe 2 years, 1 year down the line, the fight will probably happen. So talking about the fight, let's speak about the fight itself. How do we see this fight actually going? Well, should we begin by talking about, let's say, if it can happen at 155 pounds and how that will go? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it can happen, as you alluded to earlier, probably maybe if Islam loses at 170.
Yeah,
And if it happens at 155, I would have to favor Ilia Topuria because he looked really good. He's really strong, even though he's quite a small guy for lightweight. He's still has a lot of power, obviously, as we saw against Charles Oliveira. And in that scenario as well, I think if Islam comes down, I don't think he's going to step down to lightweight if he's the welterweight champ. So that probably means that he has lost. And either way, he has to cut back down, and he should have put on some natural size. So that weight cut, I mean, I think it was pretty tough for him previously, since he is a big guy for lightweight, Islam Makhachev, and to cut down after the move to welterweight will be really difficult. So I think it obviously favors Ilia Topuria, and I think that's the main reason why it won't really happen in lightweight, in my opinion. I think it's going to be a welterweight fight, this one. And how do you think it plays out if it happens at welterweight?
yeah, I agree with what you said. And I think that at welterweight, I think that it's the other way around as welterweight. I think it favors Islam there because what we've seen so far, there were some doubts before about maybe Ilya at lightweight, the power and the strength difference, but I think that what we've seen so far is maybe that Ilya is at his maybe most natural point at lightweight with his power and his strength. But I think that welterweight, we're talking about 170 pounds. I think that that's a step too far, if I'm being completely honest. And I just think that Islam is going to come down to basically Ilya will have reached his ceiling, I think, sort of right now at lightweight. Maybe in a couple of fights he will have booked out entirely, gotten used to the new weight, and then Islam he will have reached his natural point at welterweight in maybe in a couple of fights. So
Yeah,
if
that's
that,
true.
so from what we covered before, if the fight happens in maybe a year, 2 years, when Ilia is allowed to by the UFC basically to go up to welterweight, I think that it heavily favors, or at least favors, Islam, simply because of, even if because I think I actually think that they're basically equal if you look at right now, pound for pound, talking about the pound for pound. Ilya right now being both of these guys have been the pound for pound, but Ilya right now is the pound for pound king, and they're going to be fighting over this title over the coming year probably. But looking at these guys' skill, I think that they're very very similar, and they both are basically deserving of being pound for pound, I believe. And so I think that ultimately it favors the guy who's at his most natural point. And I think that at 155, it's going to be, regardless of Islam has been a lightweight before, I think that it's going to be favoring Ilya. At 170, I think that it favors Islam. I think that 15 pounds more, that's too big of a jump. I mean, Ilya is, how tall is he? Maybe like 5'6", something like that.
5'7", I think,
5'7",
or
yeah.
8, but it's not tall at all.
Yeah, there's still a big size difference there. So yeah, I do think that it favors
Yeah,
Islam,
definitely.
regardless of the skill. If they're at the same level in skill, I think that it definitely favors Islam because of the size difference. But we
Yeah,
can't
that's
really,
very true. I mean, if it
yeah.
happens, oh, sorry. Yeah.
No. I was just gonna say that we can't really know as of yet. We still have to look at maybe the fight week, maybe someone gets staph infection, whatever can happen. But I think that
Yeah, yeah.
it's pretty clear. Do you agree with that? It's pretty clear that I think 155 as of right now it favors Ida. At 170 it favors Islam, and maybe this could be like a contributing factor to maybe the fight not happening almost, because it's going to be favoring one fighter over the other at both of their weight classes. So
Yeah,
maybe
yeah, that's
like,
true.
yeah,
But I mean, if it actually does happen though, and as we said, we both agree and think that it will happen at welterweight in that case. I think if Ilya continues to win maybe a couple of fights against some good contenders like Paddy Pimblett and Arman Sarukian, will there be any doubt in people's heads that he can go up? Maybe, but I don't think it will be enough not to make it interesting. So, but I mean, Ilya, he continues on to defeat the odds, right? We've never seen a welterweight, I think, in definitely at his height and
no,
figure, uh, that has been successful at all because he is too small. But some people were saying that about him moving to lightweight as well, and he disproved it in a round against Charles Oliveira.
yeah,
So, as you said, totally agree. If it happens at welterweight, we have to favor Islam just since he's so much bigger. But as you said, skill for skill, it's a very even fight. Probably, of course, the striking favoring Islam. Sorry, Ilia Topuria, of course, there.
yeah,
Even though Islam striking is really good,
yeah.
uh, and
And
Ilia Topuria's wrestling is really good. But
the same way in the other way around. It's basically like like India basically has perfect striking and it has elite grappling, and Islam has perfect grappling and elite striking. It's such a close,
yeah,
it's just a stylistic difference, but both of them are just basically perfect at their game. They're both, the most versatile fighters in the UFC, probably, right?
yeah, two of the most complete fighters we've ever seen. And
Yeah,
I think what really adds some spice to it is what you mentioned earlier with the pound for pound there, that they are going to be fighting for that pound for pound spot, in my opinion, over the coming maybe 2 or 3 years potentially. Since if I believe if Islam wins against JDM, that he will claim back that spot. Then Ilya will have another fight, probably win and probably reclaim it, and they
yeah.
will continue to fight over that until they face each other, a bit like Volk and Islam previously. And that really adds some more
Yeah,
stakes
that
to
that
this
adds
fight.
a lot of hype, right, to the fight for everyone. It's going to be a bit, like Ronaldo Messi type of rivalry where that both of these guys are probably the best ones in their sport right now, and they're going to eventually be facing each other.
Yeah, and I think they have big fan bases, both of them. But I think the fan bases will clash a bit interesting, like you said, with Messi and Ronaldo there, that there will be a rivalry even between the fan bases of these fighters. And I think everyone in the MMA community probably will pick a side. That's going to add even more hype to this matchup. So that's why I hope we really get to see this one down the line.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest UFC fight. If both of these guys keep winning and they both meet at a point where they're at their biggest, probably at their biggest point in their career, the highest point in their career, it's going to be the biggest fight in UFC history. I truly believe that. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, if they build it correctly, I totally agree. I mean, getting Khabib in the corner and in the count and everything of Makhachev, and having Ilia with his amazing fan base and also the whole
his
PR
brother,
and everything.
Merab, his brother, his corner.
Yeah.
There's going to be
Exactly.
Georgia sort of versus Dagestan. They can really build that fight if they do it correctly, hype it a lot. And
definitely. And I mean, Islam Makhachev has a huge fan base in the Middle East to gather that as well. And Ilia Topuria has a lot of fans in Spain. So if this is done right, I think it can be. I totally agree that it can definitely be the biggest UFC fight of all time, right?
Yeah, I think it has the potential to be so, and I think that also in pay-per-views, especially if they let it, let the rivalry maybe cook a little bit for a year right now, it's going to be the biggest pay-per-view selling fight probably of all time if that happens, because everyone is going to be,
definitely.
already right now, most casual or just everyday people probably know of Islam Makhachev at least and Ilia Topuria, and if they let it go for another year, it's going to be eventually like Conor McGregor and Khabib almost.
Yeah, but I think it's fair to say almost that these two guys are better at fighting.
Yeah,
so
I think that they are
even
better at
bigger
fighting.
in that
Yeah.
case.
Yeah, they are, maybe they aren't the same level of superstars yet, but I definitely think that both of these guys are, I mean, they are more, like you talked about before, complete. They are definitely much more complete. Conor didn't at all have the grappling of Ilia Topuria, not even close to it. And
No.
Khabib doesn't really at all have the striking of Islam Makhachev. So they're both have their own style, but they're also very, very complete. And yeah, it's really difficult. That's why it's so difficult for us to see any one of them losing, which is why the only really way you can give any one of them an advantage is to basically make them go up a weight or go down a weight or coming off a loss.
Yeah, that's the only thing they can decide, is because if the fight happened tomorrow, I have no idea who takes it out. It's a
No,
complete
not me
50-50
either.
fight. But we know that it's going to be entertaining. So yeah, the fans want to see it. We can just hope that each fighter and the UFC build it up so that it becomes the mega fight that it should be, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So all in all, that's our thoughts on the potential matchup of Ilia Topuria versus Islam Makhachev, and we hopefully look forward to seeing this one in the future.
Yeah, we really hope to see this super fight, actually happen in the future. But that's all for us today. So thank you, and see you next week, guys.
Yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe.